Snow claws at Hank's Route 9 diner like a living thing, rattling glass, drowning neon in a white roar. Headlights smear into the storm, then vanish. A German shepherd erupts through the door as if thrown by the wind itself. Blood freckles the linoleum, frost smokes from his coat. The room stalls in a single heartbeat as the dog staggers, claws splaying, body folding with the graceless collapse of something that has given too much. He tries to rise, fails, and drags himself anyway, eyes burning with an unmistakable objective. Outside, engines tick in the cold. Inside, leather and steel breathe the same wary air. The dog fixes on a single figure, extends a trembling paw, and nudges forward until his body surrenders to gravity. The storm hammers approval against the walls. The shepherd's chest lifts, falls, lifts again, thinner each time. Somewhere north of Silver Ridge, something waits in the dark and the ice, and time has almost run out. Wind scours the highway, lifting snow into ghostly sheets that erase the world beyond the parking lot. Inside the diner, heat coils sluggishly from old vents, carrying the smell of coffee, antifreeze, and cold leather. The German shepherd's pupils pin to the doorway as if the storm itself holds an invisible leash. When the door shudders, his ears cant forward, and purpose knits his failing muscles into a single commandment. Boots scrape. A gloved hand tests the weight of responsibility without words. Far to the north, a farmhouse roof hunkers beneath ice like a soldier under fire. On a mantel there, a class photo smiles into another decade, parchment yellow and patient. The dog's breath rasps. Frost melts to water beneath his muzzle and threads away in thin black veins. Outside, 8 motorcycles rest like sleeping animals, chrome dulled by rime. A decision lifts in the room, subtle as smoke, heavy as debt. The storm will not bargain.
Hours earlier, the farmhouse yard lay in a silence so complete it echoed. The first step slid, the second miscalculated, and the fall arrived with the blunt certainty of a gavel. Bones struck ice, pain opened like a red flower beneath a parka. Eleanor Whitaker stared up into fat white flakes and tried to catalog the distance between the back steps and the generator shed. The measurement shifted with each breath, lengthening, receding, lengthening again. Her pulse lost cadence. She tasted iron. The shepherd gathered fabric in his teeth, hauling a comforter across snow that gripped and tore. He covered her with the clumsy precision of love, then pressed his warmth along her ribs until her shiver broke into fragments. The sky dimmed toward a color that had no name. A failing radio clicked, sputtered, died. Somewhere inside the house, pill bottles waited like mute witnesses on a counter scarred by decades. The dog looked to the road, and the road answered with nothing. Training that once tasted of grease and canvas returned in silver flashes. The tug of a harness, the call of a whistle swallowed by wind, the clean geometry of a command embedded deeper than pain. The shepherd mapped scent to direction, memory to terrain, the way a compass leans into north without question. Each step cut skin, each drift stole heat, each ditch demanded a calculation of effort against fading reserves. He rationed himself like old soldiers ration breath in high country. The farmhouse receded to a dim ember behind him. The storm brightened its appetite ahead. Frost filmed his whiskers. His chest wrote a rough arithmetic against the cold. Far overhead, a hawk rode a band of turbulent air, a dark stitch in a white tapestry. The dog did not lift his head to see it. The earth fell away and rose again, and he navigated through smell alone, counting the miles in pain and duty.
Hank's neon burned through the blizzard like a wound, red letters shaking in the wind's fist. The shepherd's gait dissolved into a clumsy slide, a scramble, a stubborn crawl. He read the signature of warmth under the door's living scent, traced the metal tang of oil and heat, and angled for salvation. The parking lot seized his paws, ice stabbed between pads already raw. He slid, righted, slid again, and struck the door with the soft thud of spent momentum. The hinge complained, light flared. The air inside tasted of coffee grounds and old sugar, a rich promise that almost broke his discipline. Almost. He found the human he needed by smell, sweat, leather, gasoline, and a memory of creek water in late summer. He nudged, insisted, pleaded without sound. His body was a map. His blood drew the route. Behind him, the storm pressed a boot print over everything that had not moved fast enough. Engines woke like captive thunder. In the lot, headlights bored into snowfall and came back shorter than they left, a physics of futility the riders accepted without complaint. The Iron Hawks shouldered formation as if a parade ground existed somewhere beneath the drifts. Tires chewed for grip, chains clicked, scarves iced over in the first 2 breaths. The shepherd rode swaddled in a blanket across steel, weight lashed down not as cargo, but as compass. The road offered lies in every direction. He corrected with a soft lean and a small bark worn to thread. The world shrank to cones of light and the metronome of pistons, hauling courage through a blizzard. When the wind veered, the hawk reappeared for a heartbeat, a ragged cross cut above darkness, then vanished into the white. The convoy advanced by inches in willpower, a slow exorcism of miles while fuel turned to heat, heat to breath, and breath to frost on beards.
The farmhouse surfaced from white like a shipwreck breaking fog. Snow had muscled up against clapboards, blown into attic vents, sculpted steps into formless humps. The generator shed wore a burial mound. On the back path, a human shape lay beneath a comforter stiffened into armor. The convoy fractured into angles, boots stabbed for purchase. Gloved hands worked with the hasty gentleness reserved for things too precious to fail. The shepherd found the face he had kept alive with breath and body heat and pressed his muzzle there once, brief and businesslike. Warmth returned in increments. Lamp glow spreading against frost-laced windows, a reluctant hum rising through pipes, a stove exhaling relief. Inside, air took shape again. The house released a hoarded smell of old wood, paper, and orange soap. Behind the sofa, framed photos lifted from shadow, a uniform, a wedding, a class lined by decades. The storm prowled at the eaves, counting seconds, calculating interest. Heat stacked unevenly in the living room, the corners stayed cold. The shepherd settled at the couch's base, eyes fixed on hands that measured pulse and breath. Around the room, small artifacts spoke, a library card worn to vellum, a mason jar of buttons, a folded flag asleep in a triangle of glass. On the mantel, a child's handwriting wavered beneath a photograph from Pine Hollow days, letters brave and crooked. Recognition threaded across years and clicked into place with the persuasive certainty of gravity. Outside, the generator coughed, caught and held. Inside, the air widened enough to fit hope. The house yielded one more truth on a kitchen table, envelopes edged in red, due dates like tripwires, numbers that did not reconcile with winter. On the sill, pill bottles stood in formation, their schedules interrupted by arithmetic that punished the body to feed the furnace. The dog exhaled, then opened his eyes wider, refusing rest.
Morning arrived without light, only a thinning of the storm's voice. The house counted losses and found its occupants still present, a small victory tall as a mountain. Across town, a bank's ledger turned pages with clean, indifferent clicks. Deadlines advanced like ice. The figure owed, 17,423, hardened into a wall no hand tool could chip. The Iron Hawks broke the problem into tasks and hours, nails and wire, bread and broth, rides and raffles, the human calculus of survival. The shepherd patrolled each room in a slow orbit, tapping instinct against thresholds, ears triangulating every unfamiliar sound. In a back bedroom, a footlocker slept beneath a wool blanket that smelled faintly of machine oil and alpine wind. On a shelf above it, a photograph held a mountain sky behind two figures, a man with steady eyes, and the young version of the dog who now limped the floorboards like a veteran in a parade of one. Clouds thinned to a colorless noon, then thickened again with a promise that felt like a threat. Word moved through Silver Ridge in the old ways and the new, carried by church basements, social feeds, and hardware counters. Casseroles arrived steaming into a cold that ate heat like sugar. Hands hammered, soldered, mended, and wrote checks they could feel in grocery aisles. The shepherd absorbed the rhythm of saw and stove, his breath syncing with the room's labor. He placed himself between doorway and couch, always equidistant from danger and the one who slept. Far overhead, the hawk traced an ellipse against the paling sky, as if stitching a boundary around all of it, a thin thread of order in white disorder. By nightfall, the farmhouse stood tighter against wind and time, but the number at Frontier State Bank did not soften. The storm turned its head and came back for a second look, unimpressed by human progress.
The second storm began as a whisper on the scanner, a low-band warning swallowed by static, but the air already knew. It pressed colder against window panes, filled corners with breath that wasn't human. Inside the farmhouse, repaired walls held warmth unevenly, each board creaking under the stress of weather and history. The shepherd's tail twitched, reading signs older than radar. Beneath his paw, the floor vibrated faintly, machinery buried deep, the old pipes groaning awake like sleepers disturbed too soon. Across the table, an envelope waited under a mug ring, stamped with a bank's insignia and the faint scent of paper inked in threat. Eleanor traced the edges absently, half listening to the radio that told of closures, roads impassable, power grids fragile as glass. The sky outside darkened into the color of memory, that strange prelude before white chaos resumes. The dog's ears lifted once more, precise, final. The storm's approach had changed direction. It was coming straight for them. In town, the Iron Hawks adjusted their maps over coffee, lines and distances turning meaningless beneath forecasts that stretched red across the plains. Each man knew the shape of the next 48 hours, cold, isolation, and a kind of quiet that bred regret. They checked fuel, batteries, generators, and then looked toward the farm they'd come to claim as their responsibility. The shepherd's story had fused their reputations to something better than rumor. They carried that weight as quietly as they carried their scars. One by one, headlights cut through slush, dispersing in opposite directions to warn, to gather, to prepare. The wind began its rise, a crescendo trapped between ridges, and snow fell in grains that bounced rather than drifted. In that metallic light before the whiteout, a hawk fought cross-currents high above, vanishing mid-arc like ink dropped in milk. On the farmhouse hill, the shepherd raised his muzzle and issued a sound both challenge and prayer.
The first flake touched the window like a signature. Within minutes, thousands followed, obscuring the world in deliberate strokes. The generator thudded into rhythm while shadows doubled in lamplight. Eleanor moved between stove and chair, conserving steps, tracing habits etched from years of self-reliance. Her breath condensed on glass, a small heartbeat of fog. The dog's reflection appeared beside hers, larger, older, patient. Outside, the landscape blurred into a single color, a place where direction dissolved. Somewhere in that moving whiteness, she imagined the roads her husband had driven, the outposts he'd ridden from, the promises that weather could break and still call natural. The storm had memory, she thought. It returned each year to test what was left standing. She touched the dog's shoulder, felt warmth dense as faith. He leaned just enough to remind her he existed. The storm thickened and all distances closed until even sound came from within. Night approached without edges. The lamps hummed, their light thinning against the weight of snow pressing glass. Outside, drifts rose past porch rails, erasing shapes, leveling fences. The shepherd kept watch at the door, his outline trembling only when wind shook the walls. In that sealed world, time lost sequence. Minutes looped like reels left running. Eleanor's breathing slowed, steady then uneven, a rhythm learned from fatigue rather than comfort. A cupboard creaked open, revealing bottles light as lies, labels curling. She counted doses, halved them, set 2 aside for later, then hesitated. The generator sputtered once, coughed, steadied. The dog lifted his head, sensing not failure but inevitability. Somewhere within the walls, heat shifted course. The air cooled fractionally, enough for him to rise, circle once, settle near her chair. The snow outside rose higher, reshaping itself into dunes and valleys that belonged to no geography ever charted by man.
At the diner, the storm's echo reached hours before the news did. Static filled the jukebox's silence. Glasses shivered in rhythm to wind, striking walls. The Iron Hawks, scattered now through the county, checked in by radio, voices granular and brief. Each reported conditions worse than expected. Roads swallowed, vehicles stranded, drifts high as doors. Yet one route remained open, a narrow spine through pine forest leading back to the Whitaker property. The shepherd's earlier journey had mapped it with blood and resolve, and now that invisible trail beckoned again. They packed provisions without ceremony, the way soldiers prepare for return missions they don't name rescue. Across the counter, Hank left a flashlight and thermos an offering, neither side speaking. The neon outside flickered once, surrendered to darkness. Engines turned over in sequence, a ritual heartbeat defying forecast. Beyond the lot, snow reclaimed the road as quickly as it was challenged, erasing proof of passage. Within the farmhouse, the world narrowed to the sound of machines and the pulse inside a weakening wrist. Eleanor's consciousness drifted between now and the classrooms of her life. Chalk dust, small hands, the perfume of paper and effort. Between those memories, silence nested, warm and final. The shepherd paced, nails ticking against wood, head turning with the methodical precision of a metronome. His breath steamed in short bursts, syncopated with her shallows. From outside came a rhythm not natural, mechanical, deliberate, the low growl of approaching engines fighting gravity. The dog froze, ears pricked to triangulate distance. Between gusts, faint light pulsed through the window, headlights forcing tunnels through the storm. The convoy had returned. Relief did not yet exist, only recognition did. He pressed against Eleanor's knee as if to anchor her until reinforcement arrived. Her hand found his fur, and for a moment she seemed to breathe in the exact cadence of the coming engines.
The vehicles arrived in staggered bursts, engines laboring, wheels grinding against ice. Many merged as silhouettes haloed by snow, shapes of motion rather than identity. The door opened on a push of wind that filled the room with stinging fragments of storm. They moved with efficiency, 2 to the generator, 1 to the firewood, 1 to Eleanor. The shepherd watched every motion, tracking each scent and gesture with the scrutiny of command. Heat returned in stages, kerosene's sharp breath, the stove's metallic hum, the combined warmth of bodies. The storm beat against glass like a sea refusing defeat. In that noise, resolve thickened into something else, devotion that didn't ask reason. They worked until the edges of cold retreated from the house, leaving only fatigue and the quiet pulse of machines doing their duty. Beyond the window, night erased their tracks again, as if the blizzard wished to keep the world small and circular. When morning surfaced, color returned in gray gradients. The storm had moved east, leaving a landscape carved and silent. Steam rose from rooftops, and the men stood outside their work, assessing damage and possibility. Inside, Eleanor slept under layers that smelled of cedar and old cotton. The shepherd occupied his post near her feet, awake but unmoving. Across the room, Jack scanned the cluttered table and found the stack of notices, each stamped urgent in fading ink. The numbers spoke clearly, unaltered by weather or sentiment. Deadlines were blind. He closed the folder and stepped back into the cold where engines idled softly, men waiting for instructions none wanted to give. From above, a hawk traced a slow circle, its shadow moving across snow like a hand brushing memory. The air was clear enough now to taste distance. The crisis had shifted from survival to consequence, and each man knew the latter would demand longer endurance.
Letters multiplied in town, invitations disguised as charity. Words like assistance and relocation carried the perfume of foreclosure. The company's emblem glinted on envelopes slid under doors, each promising salvation in tidy language. At the farm, paper gathered like drifts against the porch. The shepherd nosed one, uninterested in syntax but wary of intrusion. Eleanor read only enough to understand the bargain: surrender for comfort, displacement for safety. Her pencil scratched across margins, calculations of months, interest, and pride. The wind outside warmed briefly, signaling another change in weather or perhaps fortune. Down the hill, engines announced visitors again, official, polished, persuasive. The iron hawks lined the yard like sentries, faces hard with recognition of corporate courtesy disguised as help. Above them, the hawk turned once more, sharper now, wings cutting sunlight into fragments that scattered over the snow as if searching for a target. Inside the parlor, the room rearranged itself around confrontation. Documents unfolded across the table, lines of legal assurance written in a tone colder than the windows behind them. The men in suits spoke softly, their calm shaped by confidence in mathematics. Eleanor listened, pen balanced between fingers, the arithmetic of survival whispering its cruel truth. Sign here, relief follows. Resist, and the clock finishes what the winter began. The shepherd watched from the rug, muscles tense beneath fur, reading pulse and posture with instincts honed for threat assessment. The offer shimmered between mercy and theft. Outside, the wind paused, a false stillness before shift. One paper slid free from the stack, landing near the dog's paw. The inked emblem caught firelight, an eagle stylized into a shape too sleek, too predatory. He lowered his head, growled once, low and certain. The men continued speaking. The house, however, had already made its decision.
Snow began to fall again, quieter this time, like ash descending after a battle. The suit's vehicles vanished down the ridge, their taillights swallowed by dusk. Inside, Eleanor folded the unsigned documents and slid them beneath the stack of recipe books, the kind gesture hiding something close to defiance. The shepherd lay near the door, his breathing shallow but deliberate, gaze fixed on the horizon as if expecting the storm to return, wearing a different face. The men lingered in silence, the kind born not of confusion but clarity. They had seen too many bargains disguised as mercy. Jack moved to the window, watching flakes settle over the tracks, erasing the evidence of visitors who called themselves saviors. The farm stood alone again, surrounded by snow that glowed faintly blue under the new moon. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a hawk's cry fractured the quiet, one sharp note cutting the dusk like a reminder that nothing was finished yet. Night compressed around the farmhouse, darkness heavy enough to muffle intention. The radio crackled with half-broadcast warnings, words collapsing under static. Frostbite, wind chill, stay inside. The Iron Hawks retreated to their makeshift quarters in the barn, taking turns watching the generator's pulse. Jack remained inside, sorting through a drawer of correspondence, every envelope stamped with a history of pride and debt. He found one addressed in an unsteady hand, postmarked months earlier, its edges softened by travel. Inside, a plea written in a soldier's voice, apology without destination. The name signed below tightened his jaw. Michael Whitaker, the missing grandson, the man whose absence had written half this tragedy. He folded the letter back into its envelope, the ink still dark, as if waiting for judgment. Behind him, the dog stirred, eyes catching the lamp's reflection, gold against the dim. Recognition passed between them like an unspoken command. Somewhere, the final chapter of rescue had yet to begin.
Morning returned with a deceptive calm. Sunlight refracted through crystal air, the kind of day that tricks the body into hope. Frost glittered on window frames, turning every edge into glass. Eleanor sat wrapped in a wool blanket, her face composed but distant, listening to the house creak as if remembering all its winters. The shepherd stayed close, his movements slowed by pain, yet his awareness undimmed. Jack approached with the letter but paused, studying the lines on her face that carried equal parts endurance and sorrow. He placed the envelope gently beside her tea, said nothing, and left for the barn. There, the others already prepared the bikes for another journey. Their engines would thaw slowly, reluctant as old horses, but the decision had been made to find the man whose silence had cost too much. Overhead, the hawk reappeared, cutting through sunlight, its shadow falling across the road like an arrow pointing west. The ride toward Boulder began before noon, a convoy of metal and intent slicing through frozen air. Tires hissed on half-melted asphalt, kicking mist that crystallized behind them. Between valleys, radio chatter marked progress. Fuel stops, temperatures, silence. Every few miles, Jack's eyes found the horizon and refused to blink, as if the next turn might answer everything. The others followed, bound by loyalty they couldn't quite define. Behind them, the farmhouse shrank into landscape, a single dark line in an ocean of white. The shepherd watched their departure from the porch, ears tilted forward, tail still. He would not rest. Sentries do not sleep until missions end. In the distance, the hawk kept pace above the road, a dark signal moving against light. Each mile peeled away certainty, replacing it with a quiet rhythm of necessity. Somewhere beyond those mountains, a man waited to be found, though he no longer believed he deserved rescue.
At the rehabilitation center in Boulder, the halls smelled of antiseptic and resignation. Jack signed the visitor's ledger, his name recorded beside others who had come searching for pieces of family scattered by war. The nurse's directions led him to a narrow room with one window overlooking a parking lot covered in frost. Inside, a man sat by that window, posture bent, eyes anchored on the pale reflection of mountains he couldn't climb anymore. Michael Whitaker. His face carried the erosion of years lived under weight, creases carved by guilt, beard grown in surrender. When Jack stepped inside, the air changed, though neither spoke. Between them stretched all the unspoken consequences of abandonment and debt. The hawk outside circled once in the sky before vanishing behind a ridge. For a moment, its shadow cut across the window and lay across Michael's chest like a fleeting badge of belonging, gone before he could notice. The drive back to Montana unfolded under a sky streaked with copper light. Silence filled the cab, companionable yet charged with what words refused to handle. Snow receded into the high passes, exposing black rock in the first timid colors of thaw. Each mile seemed to subtract weight from Michael's shoulders while adding it to Jack's. Redemption had shape, but not yet outcome. The farmhouse appeared on the second evening, its windows glowing through twilight. Inside, life had rearranged itself. Eleanor upright, fire steady, the shepherd watching from the threshold.
When the truck door opened, the dog rose but did not rush forward. He stood, assessing, as handlers do, scanning posture and scent before permission. Recognition broke through hesitation like dawn through fog. Then motion, one step, then another, until distance dissolved. The reunion held no sound, only the exchange of breath between two beings who had once shared command under foreign skies and never expected to again.
Night fell early, cloaking the farm in shadow layered upon shadow. Inside, warmth gathered around the table, where 3 generations of silence finally met. The men spoke little, their gestures bridging years of misunderstanding. Eleanor's eyes moved between them, tracing resemblance, mapping grief. The shepherd lay beneath the table, a living current connecting them all. The air carried a kind of truce, but beneath it ran uncertainty. The foreclosure notice still pinned to the wall, the company's letter promising relief through surrender. Outside, wind returned with renewed restlessness, rearranging snow into ridges like sleeping beasts. In that shifting dark, the hawk's cry sounded again, faint but distinct, an ancient punctuation between one chapter and the next. Inside, the lamplight flickered, haloing faces bent in thought. For the first time in months, the farmhouse held not despair, but pause, the fragile stillness before decision becomes destiny. By dawn, the plan existed in outlines: fundraisers, calls to old students, community drives. But hope moved slower than bureaucracy. Phone lines flickered, banks kept hours that didn't match desperation. Yet word traveled faster than systems. By evening, the first visitors arrived: a farmer with spare heating oil, a nurse with medications, a child carrying drawings for the woman who'd taught her grandfather to read. Acts of kindness assembled themselves like small miracles in boots and mittens. The shepherd tracked each arrival, logging new scents, approving each with quiet authority. In the barn, the iron hawks worked late, their tools singing against frozen metal. Sparks flew, gold against the dark, mirroring the faint shimmer of possibility returning to human eyes. Above them, the hawk glided low, riding thermals born from chimney smoke. Winter had not relented, but resistance now had rhythm, a chorus of engines, hands, and a dog's unblinking gaze set against the odds.
The fundraiser filled the gymnasium with heat and motion. Folding chairs clattered, lights trembled, and the air thickened with hope disguised as noise. Banners painted in childish strokes hung above tables lined with casseroles and silent auctions. Eleanor sat near the front, blanket folded neatly over her knees, her eyes bright with disbelief at the crowd's size. The shepherd rested beside her wheelchair, posture alert, tail motionless, watching faces move like weather. Music rose, laughter cracked open tension, and somewhere amid the blur of motion, a man hesitated in the doorway. Michael. His arrival rippled through the crowd in silence first, then recognition. The shepherd turned before anyone pointed, ears forward, nostrils flaring. Across that distance of people and years, 2 soldiers, one human, one not, found each other's scent again. The room itself seemed to pause, the air drawn tight like a drum. Then the dog moved, steady and sure, closing the gap without hesitation. For a moment, sound left the building. The gym lights hummed, paper banners fluttered, but all noise belonged to the reunion unfolding center stage. The shepherd halted before Michael, held still, a statue carved from loyalty, then leaned forward, nose brushing the man's hand, breath shared like confession. Around them, the crowd exhaled as if permission had been granted to feel again. Eleanor's tears traced the geography of forgiveness.
The fundraiser's total climbed on a chalkboard at the edge of vision, numbers scrawled upward by trembling hands. Outside, snow began again, softer this time, a benediction rather than a threat. The hawk crossed the moon, shadow sweeping the roof, a signature sealing what words could not. Beneath that ancient geometry of flight and earth, the family, fractured, battered, mended, stood gathered in the light of community and redemption. For the first time all winter, the storm was only weather, and the night belonged to endurance made visible.
The storm returned by dawn, not violent yet, only steady, a whisper that carried warning. The fundraiser's warmth had not left the farmhouse. Laughter echoed in memory, but outside the world had resumed its hard discipline. The Iron Hawk's trucks idled in the yard, exhaust twisting into ribbons that vanished in snow. Inside, the family counted donations, their hands trembling less from cold than from disbelief. They were close enough to taste freedom, but not yet to claim it. On the wall, the foreclosure clock continued its impartial countdown. 6 days left. The shepherd shifted near the hearth, one eye open, always listening. He understood in the way dogs do. Tension replaced danger, paper replaced weather. Outside, the hawk traced the sky, invisible but audible through faint whistling currents. Hope had form now, but so did risk. The snow intensified, sweeping over tire tracks, insisting that every victory must first survive another test. Letters arrived with the morning wind, thin envelopes that carried consequences heavier than their weight. The first one was stamped from Frontier State Bank, another from the county office, and the last from Clearwater Development. Each envelope bore words promising solutions that reeked faintly of finality. Eleanor read them in silence while Michael brewed coffee that tasted of rust and worry. The dog's gaze flicked between them, catching shifts in tone, mapping fear to body language. Jack stood apart, reading over her shoulder, recognizing legal phrasing sharpened into coercion. The offer looked generous in ink, but hollow in intention. Surrender masked as relief. Outside, ice formed a brittle crust over snow, hardening under the glare of morning sun. Above it, the hawk rode thermals, the only creature unfazed by the human choreography below. Inside the house, quiet calculation replaced emotion, and resolve began to settle like sediment in still water.
At midday, the county vehicle appeared again, tires crunching on ice that cracked like glass under its weight. Patricia Winters stepped out, her clipboard shielded from snow by habit more than need. She crossed the porch with the brisk confidence of one who mistakes procedure for control. Inside, the air thickened. The shepherd's fur lifted along his shoulders, not in hostility, but in recognition. Bureaucracy had returned wearing the same perfume of concern. Patricia's questions came soft, but exacting. Medical adherence, living conditions, supervision. Each answer unfolded like a quiet defiance. The men listened without interruption, measuring her intent the way soldiers measure terrain. At the threshold, she paused to note the dog's presence, her pen hovering mid-air before striking the page with a decisive mark. When she left, the sound of the door closing felt colder than the wind that followed her. Snow reclaimed her tracks almost instantly, as if erasing authority itself. The hours stretched elastic, evening arriving early and without promise. Eleanor rested near the fire, exhaustion visible in the pallor of her skin, but her eyes refused surrender. Michael watched her quietly, hands clasped as if prayer might steady time. The shepherd positioned himself halfway between them, alert even in stillness. Outside, the wind reorganized itself into patterns too complex for weather reports, small vortices of snow dancing like ghosts along the fence line. The hawk appeared briefly, riding the currents before diving out of sight beyond the ridge. Inside, the light flickered, the generator struggling against the storm's new appetite. The men exchanged glances. No panic, only readiness. They had seen worse in deserts and mountains far from home. Still, the silence between gusts felt heavier now, charged with the sense that endurance had limits. The farmhouse, repaired and fortified, stood defiant against both snow and time, unaware that both would test it again tonight.
The storm matured into a siege by midnight. Wind howled through seams no carpenter could find, pressure tightening the walls until they groaned in protest. Power flickered, then steadied, then flickered again. In that uncertain light, Eleanor's breathing faltered. A hitch, a pause, a struggle to resume. Michael rose instantly, every instinct reawakened from years of emergency response drilled into him overseas. Pill bottles rattled, schedules blurred, fear dissolved into mechanical focus. The shepherd stood beside the bed, his body a trembling metronome matching the failing rhythm in the room. Outside, snow swallowed fences, devoured trees, and began climbing the porch steps. The Iron Hawks moved in practiced silence, distributing fuel, reinforcing the generator shed, fighting both time and temperature. Within those walls, 3 lives beat in unison against nature's verdict. The hawk's cry, faint through the gale, marked the hour, a sound neither triumph nor mourning, only witness. When dawn finally fractured the darkness, it did so without ceremony. The storm had not ended, it had only paused to inhale. Drifts stood taller than men, sculpted by wind into frozen waves. Inside, the house breathed shallowly, its warmth a fragile skin over cold bones. Jack checked the radio. Silence. Static filled the space where human voices used to live. Eleanor slept under sedation, her color drained to the pale of candle wax. Michael hovered close, guilt visible in every line of his posture. The shepherd paced a slow circuit, head low, tail stiff, muscles quivering with energy that had nowhere to go. On the mantel, the unpaid bills remained, edges curling from heat, ink smudged by handling. Survival had been achieved, but victory remained abstract. In the hallway mirror, frost traced patterns resembling maps, roads leading outward into nothing. The hawk would have seen it all from above, and understood. Endurance was not enough.
By afternoon, the worst had passed, leaving behind silence, dense as snowfall itself. The men ventured out to assess, boots sinking deep into the world's new shape. The sky stretched blue and indifferent overhead, deceptive in its calm. From the barn roof, smoke rose in slow ribbons, the only movement in a frozen tableau. Inside, Jack sifted through the debris of paperwork and chance, until his fingers touched the footlocker. Its lock, long forgotten, gleamed faintly in lamplight. The shepherd approached, nostrils flaring, behavior shifting from rest to urgency. He pawed once, twice, then fixed his gaze on Jack with command clear as language. When the lock turned and the lid opened, the air changed, dust, oil, and memory spilling out together. Among medals and letters lay an envelope, its handwriting familiar and steady. For Eleanor, when you need it most. The dog exhaled, settled, and closed his eyes. The mission had resumed. The envelope's contents rewrote everything. Certificates, bonds, and a letter written decades earlier by a man who had planned for a future none of them had known how to reach. War bonds converted to a trust, signatures still valid, sums large enough to erase debt and history alike. Jack read aloud in measured tones, while Michael stared at nothing, processing the miracle with the disbelief of a man accustomed to loss.
In the next room, Eleanor stirred, her pulse climbing toward consciousness, as if called by the sound of her husband's name spoken again. The shepherd rose, moved to her side, and pressed his head against her hand. She woke slowly, eyes unfocused, until memory aligned. Relief didn't show as joy, but as release, the uncoiling of years wound too tight. Outside, the hawk passed over the roof, its shadow sliding across the window like a benediction. The storm was over, redemption not yet.
The following days blurred into motion. Bank officials arrived with cautious respect, their tones softened by the evidence of legitimacy. Papers signed, accounts reopened, debts dissolved under the weight of one man's foresight. The foreclosure vanished from record, replaced by cleared title and disbelief. The Iron Hawks repaired the final storm damage, their laughter punctuating the rhythm of hammers. Inside, Eleanor moved carefully through rooms that now belonged to her again, the shepherd pacing beside her, older but resolute. Michael coordinated with the VA, arranging care that spanned both species and generations. The house smelled of coffee, pine resin, and survival. On the porch, melted snow dripped from eaves like applause fading after a final act. Above them, the hawk wheeled once and climbed into open sky, as though carrying the news to some higher archive. What began as rescue had evolved into restoration. What endured was not property, but belonging. Spring arrived quietly, sneaking through thawed soil and half-frozen creeks. Grass pushed through the last patches of snow, tentative but certain. The farmhouse breathed easier, curtains stirred with softer wind, floors warmed under morning light. Eleanor sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun she had nearly missed. The shepherd lay beside her, muzzle gray, eyes still patrolling horizons that no longer threatened. Michael worked in the garden, hands deep in soil, mending what the storm had scattered. From the distant ridge, the hawk appeared again, solitary against the vast blue, tracing circles that mirrored the slow cadence of healing below. In the evenings, neighbors came by with tools or pie, and the sound of motorcycles fading down the valley became the village's heartbeat. Peace did not arrive in triumph, but in the steady rhythm of maintenance, the quiet, ongoing act of staying.
Peace settled unevenly, as peace often does, fragile, conditional, and always one letter away from disruption. The mail truck returned after weeks of silence, its tires hissing through thawed mud. A single envelope, heavier than its size, dropped onto the porch. The ink was corporate blue, the emblem of Summit Creek Holdings pressed into its corner like a warning disguised as courtesy. Inside, typewritten promises unfolded in tidy rows, a new offer, even more generous, even more poisonous. Michael read the lines twice, recognizing a trap set by those who mistook survival for surrender. Eleanor placed the paper beside her teacup without comment. The shepherd watched, eyes tracing each gesture, tail flicking once in slow disapproval. The hawk glided over the field, shadow crossing the porch as if underlining the danger. In the distance, snowmelt carved new channels through the earth, the sound soft yet relentless, the same persistence that once buried them, now threatened in another form. Jack's investigation began quietly, a series of calls that traveled through offices, switchboards, and polite refusals. Each answer added a brick to the wall of deception: shell companies, false addresses, names that disappeared between counties. The story of Summit Creek unfolded like a crime novel written in disappearing ink. The offer to Eleanor had never been about help. It was leverage. Her property stood on land marked for industrial expansion. He assembled evidence in neat stacks, his military discipline shaping chaos into clarity. The shepherd lingered near the desk, following the paper's motion with eyes that understood more than anyone suspected. Outside, rain replaced snow, tapping windows like fingers eager to be let in. The hawk,
resilient against drizzle, perched on the weather vane, feathers slick but composed. Truth, once found, carried its own weather system.
The next morning, the air smelled of thawing earth and the faint ozone of oncoming rain. Eleanor stirred early, restless from dreams that felt like warnings. Michael sorted through bills, the final signatures nearly ready for submission to the bank to formalize the trust. The shepherd moved slower now, stiffness in his gait betraying the price of years. He still patrolled the boundaries with devotion that ignored pain. Down the hill, dust lifted, the unmistakable approach of vehicles that did not belong to neighbors. Black tires rolled deliberate and slow, pausing at the gate. 3 men stepped out, suits immaculate despite the mud, their silence louder than any greeting. The hawk shrieked once from above, cutting the morning wide open. Jack stepped onto the porch, evidence folder in hand, the wind catching his jacket like a flag raised before battle. Inside, the dog's ears tilted forward. The storm had returned, not in snow, but in human form. Words served as weapons that day. The representative spoke with a lawyer's polish. Sentences curved to sound inevitable. Jack countered with documentation, each page a rebuttal forged in persistence. Michael joined too, voice low but steady, tracing connections between forged signatures and false appraisals. Eleanor remained seated, eyes sharp behind fatigue, watching the dance of deception unravel. The shepherd lay at her feet, head raised, breath measured. When the lead negotiator realized the charade collapsing, his tone shifted from cordial to contempt. A gust caught loose papers, scattering them across the yard like a storm resurrected in miniature. The hawk dove low once, the shadow slicing through the chaos as if cutting ties to pretense. Silence followed, a long, heavy stillness where only the sound of wind through bare trees survived. The men gathered their briefcases, retreating to cars that now looked smaller, less certain. The house, once target, now felt like verdict.
After they left, rain arrived in earnest, washing the last snow from the fields. The earth exhaled, the smell of thaw carrying a sense of renewal tinged with exhaustion. Inside, Eleanor's relief collapsed into frailty. The argument had drained her reserves. She reached for water, missed, and the glass fell, shattering into a constellation on the floor. Michael was at her side before the echo faded, guiding her to the couch. The shepherd climbed beside her, uninvited yet essential, his warmth stabilizing what medicine could not. Jack fetched a blanket, but her pulse already fluttered thinly beneath skin that had learned too many winters. Rain hammered the roof with a rhythm too steady to ignore. Outside, the hawk perched under the eave, feathers slicked tight, waiting. Within the hour, the ambulance siren approached from the valley, winding up the slope like the sound of an ending rehearsed too many times before. Hospitals carry a distinct silence, antiseptic and measured, as though grief must wait its turn. Fluorescent light replaced the glow of firewood. The air smelled of disinfectant and surrender. Eleanor lay tethered to machinery that spoke in beeps and sighs, each one a mechanical translation of life continuing by instruction. Michael sat nearby, eyes fixed on numbers that fluctuated in shallow intervals. The shepherd was not allowed inside. His protest echoed in the hall until fatigue overcame defiance. He waited by the entrance doors, nose pressed to the cold scene between glass and metal, body motionless except for the tremor of breath. Outside, rain transitioned to snow again, flakes large and wet, erasing footprints before they formed. On the roof's edge, the hawk endured the weather, feathers puffed against chill. Inside, the machines continued their neutral vigil. Between them and the waiting dog stretched the narrow corridor that defines faith.
Time in hospitals moves differently, minutes stretching, hours folding. the past seeping quietly into the present. Jack returned from the city with documents proving Summit Creek's fraud, signatures certified, statements filed. Victory existed on paper, but celebration felt out of reach. In the lobby, the shepherd lay curled near the heater vent, a sentinel off-duty yet unwilling to leave post. Nurses stepped around him, each whispering a small kindness as though acknowledging rank. Michael paced the corridor, phone in hand, waiting for an update that would not come. Through the window, dawn crept pale and indecisive. The hawk, impossibly distant, yet somehow near, traced the hospital's perimeter once before disappearing into the mist. Inside, monitors hummed without melody. Hope existed, but thinly, like light refracted through fog. Outside, engines of the Ironhawks waited, idling in loyalty, their exhaust merging with morning mist, a silent guard of brothers at ease but not peace. When the call came, it carried both relief and gravity, stable, not safe. Eleanor would live, but her body demanded rest beyond human patience. Discharge awaited legal signatures and home preparation. The farmhouse needed adjustments, ramps, handrails, warmth. The Ironhawks transformed again, from riders to builders, converting machines of travel into tools of return. The shepherd rode back with them, nose pressed to the truck window, eyes scanning landscapes he knew too well. At the farmhouse, melted snow exposed grass dull with early spring, a terrain of resurrection. Michael unloaded lumber, Jack carried boxes of medical supplies. The air smelled of rain-soaked wood and diesel, an aroma of work and hope. The hawk circled once overhead, silent approval in motion. In the distance, the hospital's hum faded from memory, replaced by the low rhythm of construction. Rescue, once measured in miles, now lived in inches, rails, and steady hands.
Days stretched into a gentle pattern of rebuilding. Morning light pooled on unfinished floors, dust motes rising like faint prayers. Eleanor's room transformed into a sanctuary of warmth, quilts layered, photographs aligned, air rich with lavender and wood polish. The shepherd reclaimed his vigil beside her bed, eyes half closed but alert. Michael managed medications. Jack balanced finances. The Ironhawks came and went, carrying laughter that repaired what wood and nails could not. The bank's final confirmation arrived, a transfer of the trust's funds, debts cleared, future secured. Outside, the hawk perched atop the flagpole erected by the brothers, its feathers catching sunlight like burnished metal. In that stillness, the farmhouse no longer looked old, it looked permanent. Inside, Eleanor stirred, whispering to no one, her breath a rhythm that matched the gentle snore of the dog at her feet. The world, for the first time in months, held its breath in gratitude. Evening descended in copper tones, the sun folding itself behind ridges that still held pockets of snow. The air smelled of wet soil and pine sap, the scent of things beginning again. On the porch, Michael and Jack sat in silence, coffee cooling between them, listening to the faint clatter of dishes from inside. The shepherd lay at the top step, gaze fixed on the valley below, where headlights moved like fireflies along the distant highway. The hawk reappeared one last time that day, gliding low, its shadow sweeping across the porch, momentarily joining all living things in a single silhouette. Inside, Eleanor laughed, a fragile, astonished sound at something small and domestic. The noise carried through the screen door, turning silence into home. In that sound, winter dissolved completely. The dog lifted his head, listened, and then rested it again. The mission, though unwritten, was nearly complete.
Dawn rose pale over Silver Ridge, the light filtered through mist still clinging to thawed earth. The house stood steady now, framed by fences repaired and fields awakening. Eleanor's breathing had found rhythm again, soft and deliberate,
the steady pulse of a survivor. Michael carried fresh water to the porch, pausing to watch the shepherd stretch and step into sunlight that turned his coat to amber. Jack loaded papers into his truck, documents for the new foundation they had decided to create, one that would carry the dog's name and their story forward. The hawk hovered high above, an unblinking guardian, tracing lazy circles in the clear sky. Wind moved through the grass like a whispered conversation. Inside, the kettle began to hum, and the smell of toast mingled with the scent of thaw. Life, after so much interruption, resumed its ordinary miracles. Nothing extraordinary remained, only peace, which felt rarer still. The Iron Hawks gathered one last time in the yard, their motorcycles aligned like horses awaiting command. Polished chrome reflected fragments of sky and mud, beauty and labor side by side. They came not for farewell, but for continuation, the promise that what had been rebuilt would not again be left alone. Jack spoke briefly, though no speech was needed. The shepherd trotted between boots and tires, greeted by hands that remembered the storm and owed their warmth to his. Eleanor watched from the porch, a quilt over her knees, eyes shining with the quiet authority of someone who has already measured the true cost of endurance. Michael tightened straps on supply boxes destined for veterans still waiting out their own winters. Above them, the hawk banked against wind, its call sharp, decisive, like punctuation closing a long sentence. Engines fired in sequence, echo rolling through the valley, turning gratitude into motion.
Evening returned with a calm born of completion. The farmhouse glowed from within, each window alive with lamplight, as if the house itself had learned to breathe. Eleanor sat near the hearth, a book open but unread. The shepherd rested beside her, head heavy against her slipper, dreams flickering behind closed eyes. Running, swimming, command, release. Michael worked at the table, drafting the first charter for Rax's mission, a foundation bound to assist veterans and elders in isolation. His handwriting, once shaky, had steadied, the ink flowing sure and patient. Outside, wind rustled dry grass, carrying the memory of engines into distance. The hawk glided low across the fields, a dark ribbon against twilight. For a brief moment, its shadow crossed the window, and Eleanor smiled, sensing something complete yet unending. The fire hissed softly, settling into embers, its glow mirrored in the steady rhythm of the dog's breathing beside her chair. The next morning began with fog, a fine silvery veil that softened every outline. From the porch, the valley looked infinite and unreal. The shepherd moved slower, his joints stiff, his breath shallow but steady. Eleanor noticed and stroked his fur with a tenderness sharpened by understanding. Michael fetched the old dog's blanket and laid it beside the rocker where sunlight gathered in a warm pool. The hawk appeared faintly above, half hidden by mist, its call distant, mournful, carrying both farewell and promise. The air held that peculiar stillness reserved for thresholds, neither loss nor peace, but something between. When Eleanor whispered his name, the dog's ears flicked once, as if to confirm receipt of orders. He lowered his head, sighed once, and let sleep claim him, deep and untroubled. Outside, the first full bloom of spring opened in the thawing soil. Inside, time stopped marking seconds and began keeping memories instead.
The funeral was small, but the sky was impossibly large. Clouds drifted slow and pale across a blue that seemed too bright for morning. The Iron Hawks lined the hill with engines idling low, their rumble a hymn in mechanical harmony. A wooden marker bore the name Rax, carved deep and clean. Eleanor stood, supported by Michael, her eyes clear though wet, watching the last spade of earth fall and settle. Jack placed the dog's worn collar atop the mound, its tag catching a shard of sunlight before stilling. The hawk appeared at the horizon, a dark figure gliding closer until its shadow crossed them all. No one spoke. The sound of wind through grass and engines through air filled the silence with meaning too wide for language. When the engines finally cut, the world returned to quiet, and in that quiet, grief transformed, less a wound, more a landmark. Days passed, gentle and organized, the kind of days that rebuild routine from absence. The foundation paperwork completed, funding secured, plans unfolding across counties where forgotten veterans waited. Letters arrived addressed to Rax's mission, stories of hope drawn toward the light he had carried. Michael handled logistics, Jack networked through old channels, and Eleanor became the foundation's heart. Her handwritten notes accompanying every donation, her name carrying kindness across miles. The farmhouse, once a battleground between winter and endurance, turned into headquarters for healing. The shepherd's collar hung above the mantel, the hawk feather pinned beside it, a symbol pairing earth and sky. Outside, grass deepened, rivers fattened with meltwater, the valley humming again with life. At night, lights from the house spread into the dark like steady lanterns, a constellation marking where loyalty had become legacy.
Summer revealed what spring had promised. Renewal not imagined, but tangible. Wheat moved like gold silk under the wind. The barn smelled of hay and diesel, both alive. Volunteers arrived, young riders, veterans, nurses, each carrying fragments of their own unfinished recoveries. Work hummed in rhythms familiar yet evolving. Eleanor moved among them, her cane tapping softly, her voice measured but firm. Michael oversaw supplies, his steadiness infectious. At dusk, the valley filled with the low roar of engines heading out on rescue drills, practice for missions that blurred the line between service and remembrance. The hawk returned each evening, tracing the same pattern above, the sky's signature of continuity. In its flight, the shape of the old shepherd seemed visible, strength and vigilance in motion. The farm's lights came on one by one, and the night accepted them as part of its natural order. Autumn arrived painted in copper and smoke. Leaves spun through air like drifting coins, the land paying its debt to the year. Eleanor's health wavered, but her spirit grew fierce, her voice gaining a timbre of command when speaking about the mission. Michael expanded outreach into other states, and Jack's reports filled binders with results. Shelters built, families reunited, storms faced and survived. The hawk continued its vigil, sometimes perching on the porch rail, watching reflections in window glass, as though searching for the dog whose scent still lingered there. Inside, fire returned to the hearth, the same place where Rax had once stood guard. The room felt full even when empty. Night settled earlier now, the valley folding into itself. The light from the farmhouse remained, steady as ever, proof that warmth can persist even when the source becomes memory.
Winter crept back with deliberate grace, snow arriving soft and impartial, covering the markers and the roads alike. The foundation thrived despite distance, its symbol, hawk and paw entwined, painted on mail trucks and banners across counties. Eleanor watched from her chair, wrapped in the same quilt that had seen storms, rescues, rebirths. Outside, the Iron Hawks maintained the grounds, their laughter blending with the hum of engines echoing faintly against snow. Michael stood by the porch rail, eyes lifted toward the pale sky.
For a heartbeat, the hawk hovered directly above him, wings wide against sunlit frost. Its cry reached through the chill, high and unbroken, the same note that had once cut through a blizzard to mark survival. In that sound lived both presence and absence, reminder and reward. The air shimmered faintly, carrying peace back to every soul who had once waded through winter. Spring came again, softer this time, as if the land remembered how to breathe. The farmhouse stood at the valley's heart, surrounded by fields shimmering with new life. Volunteers gathered for the foundation's annual celebration, engines forming a chorus beneath a flawless sky. Eleanor's chair sat empty now, but honored, draped in her quilt, a single hawk feather resting atop it. Michael read her last note aloud, words about duty, compassion, and the strange symmetry of rescue. The crowd fell silent as a shadow passed overhead. The hawk made one final circle, wings catching sunlight like burnished bronze, then drifted toward the mountains. Below, the banners of Rax's mission fluttered in the same wind, their edges bright against blue. The engine started together, sound rolling through the valley, not in grief, but gratitude. The story had closed, yet its echo carried forward, endurance translated into flight, loyalty immortalized as light.